Welcome to the Disciple Making Leaders podcast. I'm Mike Keaton, your host, and I am joined today with the lead pastor of Crossroads Church, founder of Impact Ministries, Ken Adams. And we are really glad that you have tuned in with us today. And Ken, as always, I'm glad to be able to be here and share these conversations with you about making disciples and fleshing that out in a local church context, especially. And so we've been having these conversations about how to do that. And most recently, we've been talking about the next level of that. You know, we've talked about strategies and how do you make the strategy work without leaders that are going to make disciples. And so really it's the leadership part of that. And so in our last episode, we talked about how to define and develop disciple-making leaders. And so you want to quick give them a short snapshot of what we talked about there, and then we'll launch into what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And that was a great setup, framing it up. And you know, I just want to say as we begin, you know, we have some folks that follow us on our podcast here. And, you know, man, I would want to make sure everybody understands that we are in no way have arrived or we haven't even figured it out. What we're sharing are things we're learning and things that God has been teaching us. You know, we've been swinging at this disciple-making command for 30 years. And so one of the things that we've discovered is sometimes resources for how to do, how to lead the church to become a disciple-making movement, sometimes those resources are limited. And so so what we are seeking to do here with our podcast is really just to come alongside people and help share with other church leaders what we're learning and what we've been discovering. And so one of those things that we have discovered is that Jesus very clearly, his strategy was to make disciples, and then out of those disciples, he had a pool to draw from for leaders. You know, isn't it interesting that in the Gospels you hear about the 12 disciples? We know that Judas, you know, didn't stick with him. They ended up, you know, taking his life. And then as they go into the New Testament, they replace Judas with another apostle. And then what's interesting is that you really only hear about 3 of those disciples throughout the book of Acts. You only hear about 3 of those, and then Paul is kind of added to that equation. But you really only hear about Peter, James, and John.
Right.
And so, and there's a lot of debate about that, and actually where those apostles end up. Some of them may have gone to different regions. Some of them may have just become leaders in the church at Jerusalem. But clearly, Jesus had a priority of appointing people into leadership because they were proven disciples. And so I think it's important for us to be able to know when a person is ready to become a leader. You know, Jesus knew before he ever asked anybody to step into a leadership role to be reproducing, that they were ready, that they were prepared, that they had been equipped in order to do that. So in our context here at our church, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people go from being untrained to becoming fully trained, so then they're ready to lead.
Yes.
And so we're not putting people into leadership positions before they're ready, before they're qualified. If you stop and think about it, Mike, that's got to be one of our biggest problems. We're putting people into leadership before they're ever even ready to lead.
Right.
And then we're wondering why the church isn't making more of a difference and making more of an impact. And so you wouldn't dare put a person in a major league baseball lineup if they hadn't first proven that they were ready. You wouldn't put somebody in your military as a general if they hadn't been equipped and trained to do. You wouldn't put somebody in a classroom before they'd been a student teacher and before they'd gotten a degree and before. So, man, why is the church so far behind when it comes to defining and developing leaders? Now, I said all that to say that we do have to define what a leader looks like. And the cool thing is that that's not for us to decide. God has already defined it.
So much freedom in that.
That is so much freedom
Absolutely.
in that. And so I don't have to go to the next greatest leadership seminar
Try to figure it out, right?
to figure it out. All I got to do is read the Bible, man.
That's it.
And so if you go all the way back to the days of Jeremiah, and I just want to read it again. We read it last time, but Jeremiah says in chapter 3, verse 15, God says, "And I will give you shepherds after my own heart," after my own heart. And so the very first step in becoming the leader that God wants us to be, a disciple-making leader, is that we got to have the right heart. And when you fast forward the tape to Jesus being, I believe, the perfect model. In fact, I believe that's really a prophecy of Jesus in some ways. Jesus becomes the perfect model of a leader after God's own heart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you talk about the heart, we go all over the map when it comes to defining heart. But really and truly, heart is not just attributes in a leader. It's really what drives a leader.
Right.
Mike, we say this all the time. When we're talking about our kids, we say, honey, do this with all your heart. Mm-hmm. We say your heart's not in it. When we use the word heart, what we're usually talking about is your desire, your motivation, whatever drives you to do the right thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because even like a coach would say that guy plays with heart.
Exactly.
Right.
So when we're talking about disciple-making leaders in the church, man, I mean, what a very simple idea. What if you had a whole church full of leaders all being driven by the same thing? And what if that same thing was the very thing that drove Jesus to do what he did? So that brings us to an interesting thought. So what in the world would drive Jesus Christ to leave heaven, the glory, the splendor, the majesty of heaven? What would drive him? Now we know that love was what motivated him, but what really drove him to leave heaven, come here, live a perfect sinless life, and then die and be raised again? What drove him to do that? I believe that what his desire was to see it, because he said it. His desire was to see every person in every nation, in every generation, learn what it means to first be a disciple and then build more disciples. Mm-hmm. And Mike, if we get back to doing what Jesus came to do, that is how we're going to change the planet. Listen, government is not going to fix it. Economics is not going to fix it. Social reform is not going to fix it. What's going to fix it is when we get back to doing what Jesus did. And if we do what Jesus did, and we can get a whole church filled with leaders that are leading in that direction, then here's what will happen, is it will change the world we live in.
Absolutely. That's such a powerful thing. I remember hearing somebody say one time that when the church, when it's working right, the way Jesus had intended it to be, it provides hope for the world.
Yeah.
And such a powerful movement
that
can take place.
And so what we need is that we need to have leaders with the right heart. Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, he said, guard your heart. Mm-hmm. Guard your heart. Why? Because that's where we get in trouble. You know what? Here's what I can tell you. If you got a whole team of leaders that have the right heart, let me tell you something. It's going to take care of a multitude of problems. Because if you got the right heart, you're gonna work through problems so that you're all going in the same direction.
Yes.
And if you don't have the right heart, man, you got more problems than you know what to do with.
Yeah, that's a powerful word right there.
Yeah. I used to ask myself this question. I used to say, how do you know? I mean, literally, I used to say, how do you know if somebody's got the right heart or not? And I for a long time, quite honestly, I didn't know how to answer that. And then one day, it literally, the Lord just hit me. It was like a ton of bricks. The Holy Spirit just spoke to me and said, the way you know somebody's heart is what they complain about. And I'm like, what? And I thought, yeah, actually, here's what you discover, is that a person's heart is sometimes revealed, not the only way, but sometimes revealed clearest by what a person focuses on or what they complain about. So think about it like this. In 3 decades of being a pastor here, okay, how many times do you think anybody's ever emailed me, texted me, come to see me, sent me a letter, and complained about the fact that we're not making enough disciples?
Every day, right?
Wishful thinking.
Yeah, right.
0.
Right.
Now think about that. In 30 years of being a pastor, nobody's ever one time said, why aren't we making more disciples? And that is our mission. And nobody's ever said, not one time, Mike, in 30 years has anybody ever said, why aren't we baptizing more people? Not one time has anybody said, why aren't you talking about giving more? That's never happened.
Yeah.
But can I tell you this?
So I was going to ask you, well, what do they say?
Yeah. So I've got a whole file full of people who've sent me emails about the volume of our music, or the temperature in the auditorium,
Lord
or
have
about
mercy.
how long I preach.
Wow.
Let me tell you something. I've got a whole file full of things that people are obviously more concerned about than the things we ought to be concerned about.
Yeah, that right heart is key.
It is key, man. So I got to tell you this story as we get ready to wrap this session up. So I had a opportunity to go to a pastor had invited me to visit his church in Chicago, and I got to spend several hours with him, kind of helping him evaluate his ministry. And he was wanting to have really a disciple-making focus in his church, and we went and met together. And we'd had lunch together, went back to his church. He was showing me around. He's in a very old established community in really the southwest side of Chicago. And it was one of those communities, his church was actually a couple hundred years old. It had been there. Beautiful building, beautiful rock building. It had been there since that community was built. That was one of those communities where they had all the streets were running in the same direction, and just a really beautiful old community. And I noticed right when we were getting ready to leave, I said, "Where's your parking lot?" And he had one little spot for 2 vehicles. And I said, "Where's your parking lot?" And he said, "We don't have a parking lot." And I was like, "How do you have a church without a parking lot?" He said, "When this church was built, people walked to church." And he said, now we just park all along the roads here in the community, and we have a park up here where some people park. I said, "This is Chicago." And I said, "It snows and it's cold, and people walk from that park to this building." And he said, "Oh yeah, we don't think anything about it." So I come back to Atlanta. I come back to Sharpsburg, to where our church is. And a few weeks later, we open up a brand new facility, a brand new multi-million-dollar facility, state-of-the-art facility. And our parking lot is on a little bit of an incline, And believe it or not, some of the first things I heard after our grand opening was not, "Wow, how beautiful this is," not, "Wow, how state-of-the-art this is," not, "Wow, are we going to be able to really use this to make disciples?" Some of the first things I heard, "Why did we build it on a hill?" "Why did we have a parking lot with an incline?" Mike, I could not believe that in fact, what I've said many times since then, and I understand, I get it, I understand people have challenges, I understand that. But here's what I say. If our heart was what it needed to be, man, we could build this thing on the highest hill anywhere, cover it with glass, and it'd be worth it to crawl up it. If it meant leading one person to faith in Jesus Christ.
That's right.
If it meant having one person be and build disciples, dude, it would be worth going to a cross to see that happen.
And so that you can see why we are swinging at it as we are, because we have that kind of work cut out for us.
We really
Just
do.
Trying to develop leaders here.
And so one of the things we're doing is that we're using our 315 curriculum to help develop disciples. We have defined what a leader looks like, and now we have a process where we meet together on a monthly basis over a period of 9 months because here's what happens, Mike, you don't develop the right heart overnight. You have to be talking about the heart really over an extended period of time. That's what Jesus did. It took Jesus a period of 3 years to help these guys get a new heart, to help them have a new desire and a new motivation. They were originally just motivated by fish, and now they were fishing for men.
Yeah, it's good. So thank you, Ken. Appreciate that.
Thanks, man.
And thank you guys for listening in today. And as you can see, we're trying to do what we can do to develop leaders with the right heart. And our desire is to share our learnings with you to help you do the exact same thing in your context. I'd encourage you to go to impactdisciples.com, where you can get these resources that Ken was just talking about, our 315 leader training, and learn more and even begin the process of starting a disciple-making movement in your context. Thanks for joining in today. We'll see you next time.